So Keith, Michelle, we've been talking about doing this for a while. Appreciate you guys coming on. Keith, you came all the way from the ATL.
Yes, sir.
What's up with that?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I have a second home in Atlanta, or maybe a first home at this point. So I have my office and practice here in LA.
Mm-hmm.
I also have office and practice in Atlanta. I have a home in LA and a home in Atlanta. I moved during COVID, actually.
Nice.
And, life is good, man. I got, my Delta points up. So
Right.
I get to travel back and forth, get a couple first class flights in here and there because all the points built up. And it's been good. I love it.
Yeah, having that flexibility. Huh?
Yeah.
I think after the pandemic, we all got a little bit more flexibility of not having to be in court every day, doing Zoom meetings, virtual meetings. I kind of like it. How you feel about it, Michelle?
I love it. I can, make a fantastic breakfast while I'm waiting for my case to be called.
That's right. Yeah, you like to cook.
I do.
That's what's up. And so you spent some time in New York too, right?
I did, yeah. And that's how I learned to love to cook. I worked in the restaurant industry for a decade. So.
All right. That's beautiful.
It was
That's
fun.
beautiful, man. But there's a lot going on these days, right? In the news, TikTok, this whole thing, they're trying to ban TikTok. It seems like, and it's a heck of a platform, social media is big these days, right? People are using it not just for style, for food. Some people run their businesses on social media.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people who have small businesses on TikTok. I guess they get more exposure. They make more money than other platforms. I guess it's easier to monetize. So I think it's going to really hit a lot of people who have kind of embraced this gig work or, have their little side hustle and their little side project.
Yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Honestly, man, I don't know if you're on TikTok. I've been thinking about it, but I don't want nobody laughing at me. You know what I'm saying? But, what's your take on it?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to happen because people have to realize a couple things. One, it's a political issue. It's a political issue and it is a public safety issue. And it's not a ban. It's really about they're saying that you either shut it down or you sell it to an American company.
Right.
You got to ask yourself this. First of all, they are a Chinese-owned company. And by virtue of that, the Chinese government can request and get user information, your data, right? Mm-hmm. And so the big thing about that is you got to think back to the Russian interference with the election and Facebook. It's really all about that.
Right.
Right? Our data is more powerful than we know. We don't even think about it, but it is a free pass inside of your head.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like? What time you get up? What time you like to shop? What time you like to do this stuff, right? Yeah. And especially think about the Chinese government, because they will turn it over, right? There's no question about if they turn it over. They will turn it over because why not? Wouldn't you want to find out all of the information about the residents or citizens of another country, especially in election years,
right,
when you can shape so much about what people think? So, and the other thing is so far, Democrats and Republicans haven't been able to work together on shit. This is the one thing that they passed 50-0 in the House of Reps.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So it's a chance for them to get a win. It is a national security risk. And then I think the other thing is, content creators, don't hate me too much for saying this. People have proved to be really resilient when it comes to social media usage. Y'all remember back in the MySpace days, everybody was using MySpace. Then everybody went to Facebook. Then everybody went to Instagram. So there will be something else. And I also don't think they're going to have a problem finding an American company to buy it.
Right.
Who's not going to buy that?
Right. So you think somebody's going to replace TikTok. So we're not, but the security risks, I know some universities you work at, they tell you can't even have TikTok on your own device.
Yeah. Right.
And I guess it's because if you have other apps open that may affect, the university or the company that you're working from, then they're worried about their privacy being at risk too.
Yeah.
So, it's got a lot of eyebrows raised.
I guess the question is why now? We saw what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and how they were manipulating people's feelings, right? Running certain ads. And, so why TikTok? Why now? And why are we not looking at broader industry regulation? Mm-hmm. There are so many hearings in Congress about how social media affects teenagers and how they've specifically made it addictive to kids. So, as a parent of teenagers, I wouldn't mind having some more kind of industry regulation, not just on TikTok. I'm not sure what it would be.
Right.
But,
Right.
Well, I heard that Biden, is either about to or did pass into law some bill that like prevents the sale of data to like Russian operatives or just Russian in general or Chinese, right? But the problem with that is VPNs, right? So, but at least it's a step, but I do think that it's the next step in this ongoing war. Temu may be next. You may not be able to get your cheap wigs and bundles next. But I think something more is going to happen because, to me, those elections showed how easily we can be swayed because the internet is the biggest source of information, which also by default makes it the biggest source of disinformation. So it's just too easy to manipulate people in giving away or selling their data, and you got to be careful whose hands it falls into.
Right.
Now, this could affect voter turnout too, don't you think?
Yeah.
With the Gen Z, people may just get upset and say, I'm not taking part of it.
Right.
What are your take on that? Just as far as how is it going to affect?
I think it could happen, but I think I when I look at the bigger picture, you got to check it somehow or some way, and listen, there's a whole bunch of reasons that people may not turn out. There's two 80-year-old dudes running for president.
Yeah.
People may not vote just on the strength of that.
Right.
They may vote on the strength of just, general disillusionment with the country. So I don't think that you can not do things. And the other thing is, I know the tech industry is strong. I don't know if the tech industry is 100% behind, standing in solidarity with TikTok on this. I don't think they are. I know that they may not like it and they're maybe concerned about what happens to me next, but I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think there's this legislative push by the tech companies in terms of, grassroots. You don't see any campaigns against shutting down TikTok, so there's no real money behind stopping this from what I've seen, at least so far.
Speaking of our current tech overlords, the tech companies, one of the things that I think about that I find is really disturbing, and I don't know if we can get into a serious topic, but is the problem that parents have who run accounts for their children when they report inappropriate comments by adults on kid accounts. And I've heard again and again, and I think the New York Times recently did an expose on this, that there are not a lot of controls, and parents have reached out to Meta, for example, and saying, hey, there's a 50-year-old dude stalking my kid, and the response has not been very good. So again, I know that TikTok is a problem, for the national security reasons, but I think we really do have to look at what's going on, especially, with regard to children in our social media.
Right. So
even if they sell TikTok, we still have a problem.
Right. Right. Meaning the access of information that kids have to and the people that have access to your children.
Right.
Right.
Right. And the, everyone's trying to monitor content and block this person and this and that. And I've heard that it's hard. It's hard for parents to manage that.
Yeah. It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I never know what my kids are doing on their devices, I've just given up. But it might come to bite me in the butt. I don't know.
I am the opposite. If my children change the password on their phone, they lose their phone. I do occasionally do checks. I do go through their social media. My kids are young teenagers, and
right. And you have girls.
I have girls, and I have seen so much, and I have professionally and personally heard of so many predators out there. So I'm really careful, and they know that.
Right.
So they know that I'll be watching. And I don't go through their text messages, but
right.
I want to know who are your Snapchat friends?
Right.
Do you know all these people?
Right.
I want to know who's messaging you, where are the requests? The hidden requests on Instagram,
right.
the messages. I'm okay, who's messaging my kid?
Yeah.
So
I'd be scared about my kids getting bullied or developing an inferiority complex. Because one of them's very, very impressionable. You talk about him, he's basically in tears, and then obviously this new generation, you got guys walking around with purses and the different styles, and you do so much to try to protect, based on your own beliefs or whatnot, but not everybody's ready for that.
Yeah.
But what do you do? But it's all over the news too. It's all over, everywhere, so how do you really protect your kids?
I think that this, I see in my kids, they're very, very open-minded. And they're experiencing the world in a way that's very different from what I did when I grew up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much more information that, that they have available to them. And I do kind of have faith in these younger kids. There's a lot of love. I see a lot of positive content. They are, they're interacting with kids who are very different with them.
Right.
They're interacting with kids who have like different abilities. And I think we've seen that on social media as well. I don't know if you've seen any of these accounts. There are a lot of kids with like, who have chronic diseases or something else, and they have put out positive content.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole groundswell of support for them.
Right. It does bring a certain awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my kids are seeing more of that,
Okay.
than I would have seen when I was a kid. So
Right.
I think that's good.
Okay. Some people with the TikTok, it almost feels like we're bullying, our adversaries, right? Like if we're at odds with somebody, then we want to control their economy, but you're saying, hey, it's not a big deal because, somebody's going to buy it. But at the end of the day, is this sort of a Cold War, like where we're trying to control the economics of maybe countries that we don't really get along with?
Yeah. I mean, I just look at it like the positive and the negative of social media and the internet is, well, like I use myself for an example. Like when I first started using Instagram, Facebook, what's the number one reason that I started using it? A, because it was free, and B, because everybody I knew was on there, right? And so, but at the time, I didn't, and we didn't know, like, they're taking your shit and they're selling it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people still don't really grasp how, like, I think about it like from the company standpoint, like what would you pay to have like, oh man, these are people that are looking for lawyers.
Right.
They're looking for lawyers. They're facing divorces. They're facing employment problems. Like, what would you pay? I would be like, dude.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? How much do you want for it?
Right.
So it's like, and I know that they're thinking about like they've had 20 searches for divorces in the past 30 days.
Right.
I'd be like, oh my God. Like.
But as lawyers, we can tap into that, right? There's AI. I mean, so as lawyers, how do you feel about using AI maybe to find the type of client that maybe is looking for your services?
Yeah. AI is going to change the game.
Yeah.
I think, like we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg with AI. But I think it's going to be great for that. But the thing I think, I don't want to take it too far left.
Sure.
But the thing I think about with AI is like the only reason why AI isn't used extensively by lawyers now is because there hasn't been a software that populates it with case law.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody will.
That's not true.
Yeah, I've heard.
That's not true.
Lexis, Westlaw.
We use co-counsel.
Okay.
And it is, I tell the story, the trial I was telling you about before we started. I had an issue before the judge at 8:30 in the morning, and she made a bad ruling, and I needed a motion in 30 minutes. I went to co-counsel. First of all, I called my friend, and I was like, I got something coming your way. I need you to be ready. But I went, and I put in the question in co-counsel, and it spits out, case law and information, and it and then you can refine it. Okay, well, what about this? Or, and it will give you a memo. And the great thing about that is that it doesn't have the problem with ChatGPT where it's making up like phantom cases.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's also a closed, it's SOC 2 compliant and a closed universe. So you know that even if you're asking a sensitive question, none of your client's information is going to get leaked.
See?
So it's there. It's here.
Well, you know what? See, I knew it was just going to be a matter of time before somebody did it. But now, like, you think about the effect of that. So now you don't have to hire an associate to spend an hour researching and another 2 hours drafting it.
Yep.
That's 3 hours times $400, $500, $600 an hour. That's money that your clients don't have to pay, So, and then like, if you think about it on a purely AI level, right? Why wouldn't we just have AI attorneys arguing cases?
Yep.
The real question to me is not whether AI is going to replace attorneys. It's whether they're going to replace judges.
Judges?
Think about it.
Man.
Think about it.
It's easier to replace the judge than the attorney, in my opinion.
But like we were just talking before this about like human
I like
error,
where you're going with that.
Human error in judges.
Oh, yeah.
Judges have biases
They do.
because they are people, right?
Yeah.
The number one most powerful thing a judge can say to you is, I don't find your witnesses credible.
That's true.
They can testify to whatever, and the judge can just say, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Right? And so AI does eliminate that, and it makes everything automated. Oh, well, you know what? In this case, it could.
It could, but the problem with the AI, again, talking about algorithms, which I think going back to the social media, the problem with AI is that it's built on an algorithm that's either built by a human or is learning, like human learning. And I think we've seen with some other AI that it will come up with racist or sexist tropes, and that will get built in there.
Yeah.
And it will have the biases of the people who are programming it, which is why DEI is so important when we're looking at AI.
DEI.
This DEI that is the boogeyman of our political discourse these days.
That is true.
Yeah.
So you see that factoring in, why? Because that implicit bias is now played out in what AI is producing to us.
Right. So, I mean, I would hope that there are many people with many perspectives from many backgrounds working with AI, programming AI, so that, somebody says like, that maybe, or like, from my perspective, and so we get a rounder, more full vision that's programmed into the AI.
Yeah.
So we eliminate those biases.
Now, for me, I'm always looking at my audience anyways. So if I'm going to a particular judge, I'm going to do my homework. So say I have my AI and I'm going to create my own little category. I'm going to put some background on that judge in there. I'm going to feed the AI sort of like, I'm going to give it the context that I want it to have. So it's kind of spitting out what I want it to spit out. It's supposed to just something random. I don't want it to pick it from, another judge or, some judge in Tokyo, Japan, or just who knows where. So I'm going to give my AI some context, and I'm going to say, based on this context, how do you think is the best way to approach this?
Yeah, but sometimes, like Keith was saying, the judge just doesn't.
Yeah, judge, whatever they want.
They just decide, like, no, it's and what is the reason that, who knows what the reason is that they decide it's not credible or they're not going to consider the weight of this evidence.
That's true.
That's the scary part.
It's like, even with our conversation, though, we're all talking about ways to make AI better, which kind of assumes that it's now a part of our lives and a part of our routine.
It is.
And let's be honest. Like the reason why, I know they changed it, or at least I heard they changed it recently. The reason why California and New York had these low bar passage rate was why? Oversupply of attorneys. Like really? Just to keep it 100, right? So it's like there's too many attorneys out there, truthfully, and it's like you have this mechanism by like I mentioned earlier. If you can eliminate appearances, which we've done, with post-COVID. With the virtual appearances.
Yeah.
Right.
So we now eliminated travel time to court. Now we're eliminating research, the time to spit out a brief. That's I could bill a whole day in the past just on researching, writing a brief, and traveling to court.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
But can we even bill for the work that AI does?
Oh, so that's the interesting thing. I don't think we have exact regulations on that. I think we have to be really careful. I know that there are multiple bar associations that are looking at this, and I think that there have been some preliminary opinions, but can you bill for what AI does? I mean, that's the hard part, right? Yeah. The AI thinking happens very fast. Yeah. So, but the thing is, you're still crafting the prompts. Right. You're still sorting through the results.
Right.
You have to be the gatekeeper to make sure that the AI
absolutely
does the correct reasoning. So I don't, for what I've seen now, I don't see anything where there would be any ethical issue with billing for AI because I'm literally sitting there thinking about what am I asking it.
Right.
So.
And then you have to confirm it before you really present it to the judge. Right. Like, you had a question, you're in the middle of a trial, the judge is doing something, you're like, this don't seem right. So you ask the question, AI is like, you're right, this ain't right. And for me, that's what I use my law clerks for. I may have 4 or 5 of them that have some context about the case, and then things are going on. It's like, look this up for me. This just kind of is rubbing me the wrong way. And then sure enough, during the break or whatever, they give me a brief. I double check it. I says, Your Honor, I want to bring some things to the court's attention. I want to brief it tonight and have it heard before we move on. And that's kind of like the same thing you're doing with the AI, because as the lawyer, you still have to check the reference. You have to make sure as an officer of the court that what you're presenting is something that has like proper foundation. You can't get it from your little kid's lunchbox or from the newspaper or whatever. So I like it. I'm fascinated by it because, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. So a lot of times if I have a case, there's like 10 defense lawyers from the insurance company or from the government working against me. Well, guess what? It evens out the playing field now.
Absolutely. I would say that is 100% true. I think one of the hardest parts about plaintiff's practice is kind of having that balance between, here I have somebody who's working and they get paid by the hour. And so they want to drag it out. They want to give me as much paper as possible.
Right.
And here I am trying to provide a service on contingency. So I gotta be lean and I gotta be mean and make sure that I serve my client. So yeah. That really does balance it out.
I really like it, man, because a lot of times I was scared of it at first because it was like the AI was thinking about something before I thought about it. I was like, oh, so what, you going to tell me I got to go to the bathroom now? I was like, seriously, I was kind of spooked out a little bit, but then my wife was she's really into it. She's smart. So she would look it up. See, I'm right. Look, the AI tell me I'm right. And I'm like, the AI agrees with you? I'm like, okay, well, let me check it out because she's usually on point. If I go to battle with her and we got twins, and that's why they're so good because they see us discuss, I'm not going to say argue, right? Debate, and I mean, they're really good. And so, man, I'm fascinated by it. And at the same time, if it helps me answer the client's questions, because they have some now where the clients are just asking questions and the AI, but they're just getting information to say, oh, do you mean this or that? And so they're just categorizing really what the client is saying and putting it into a mode. Because I use one, for example, for about 2 weeks. And so I would ask all my questions verbally, okay? After 2 weeks, the AI was already asking the clients these questions, like pre-qualifying them. So by the time I looked at it, normally I get like maybe 50 calls and I might take 1 or 2 of those cases. But it takes a lot of time to say, I'm not going with these other 48.
Right.
The AI does that for you.
Wait. So go back. Whoa. Yeah. How does the AI do that?
I don't know the name of the software, right? But first of all, they have this thing like now when you do your Zoom calls, they can kind of record your Zoom call. When you hang up, they'll kind of give you a summary of your Zoom call.
Right.
Or if you have a board meeting even, they'll give you like minutes from your board meeting. Now, you still have to go through and make sure everything's accurate, right? So I was like, wow, they're kind of summarizing what we just talked about in this meeting. So rather than me having to debrief my staff, so my staff talks to somebody and I go, hey, what was the conversation like? Did you ask him this question? Did you ask him that question? Could you type up some notes and send it to me? Get it on my desk maybe about an hour because I want to see if I need to call back that client. Well, now when the client hangs up the phone, within about 1 minute, I have a report on that conversation. And I was like, this is pretty good. Bullet points and everything. Basically what they just talked to the clients about. I'm like, this is cool because now I don't have to do this debriefing with my staff. Wow. So then I said, look, let me get involved in these discussions as well. So now I'm asking the questions during the interview, even if I'm just driving somewhere or whatever, right? Because I know that I'm going to get some notes as soon as I hang up. So I had the same type of questions because I had the same case. It was just a discrimination case, but I basically talked about 5 discrimination cases in a row. The AI was picking up the algorithms. So then what happened is on the form that the client kind of fills out in order to pre-qualify for the next step was the interview with me. And then the third step is me getting the report. The AI was anticipating the questions that I was going to ask in my interview with the client. And it already pre-qualified the client just right. So it knew the questions I was going to ask the question that ahead of time. So by the time I sat, I was like, oh, I don't even need to talk to this person because the AI already pre-qualified them for me.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, we need to talk about that.
Yeah. And it's legit. But you see, the thing is, it was learning my style. It was learning my questions. It was learning what I was interested in. And so now on the form that they fill out, even to get to the second stage, all my questions from the second stage were already incorporated.
That is great.
And as the client's filling in the information, it's kind of asking backup questions as well. So, I mean, it takes a lot of legwork out of what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what though? So much of what we do is legwork. Like to me, like the invisible hand behind all technological advances is business efficiency. Every single one. Like you think about electricity, coal, railroads, mass transit. Like it's all so businesses can operate more efficiency. And the truth is, to me, the practice of law is like one of the most, behind the scenes, is one of the most, has been one of the most antiquated fields of business ever, right? I remember when I first started practicing, I see attorneys take this dictation. So, Dr. Johnson, semicolon. Then you got to play it back. Somebody has to type it up. And that's, believe it or not, there's still like some old school attorneys that don't have computers, And so, and it's a super, like you think about it, you have to, there's a process. I remember when I first started my own practice, I would be on the phone with people for like half an hour before I knew any better. Half an hour talking to them, and then I'd be like, yeah, they don't have a case. But guess what? It's a half an hour in. It's half an hour in, and if I take 5 of those calls, right, my whole day is done. And then you think about like the process of junior associates, senior associates, law clerks. Like it's a lot of duplication in a lot of ways, So I know that, given the history of every technological advance that's happened before now, it's going to dramatically affect our industry, and it's going to cut, it is what it is. It's going to cut a lot of the duplication and unnecessary positions and processes within the legal industry, just like any other technological advance does. You know?
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page on that one. That's going to be interesting. Another topic, what is it? This MMA? Is that what's going on? I mean, but, so I don't know. Me personally, I remember Hulk Hogan days, what was it, WWF or whatever? I remember those days. And it really wasn't until Conor McGregor and the Floyd Mayweather fight, right? That kind of MMA style fighting, came back on my radar. But now it's a big thing. They're talking about wage suppression. They're talking about, what's going on in the news now on this issue?
I can start. I mean, from what I understand, it's a $335 million settlement with I think they did certify it as a class.
Right, class action lawsuit.
They got certified.
But and it was about wage suppression, right? But when I think about the UFC, I think about 3 people. I think about Jay-Z, Bun B, Pimp C, Big Pimpin'.
Right.
Somewhere in Dana White's closet, he got a chinchilla white fur coat and a white fur hat, and a goblet with some rubies on it, because he's pimping, right. Let's look at the facts. Revenue sharing in the NBA, you know what it is? 50-50. NFL, 47% goes to the players. How much goes to the UFC fighters? 20%.
20%.
But they have no union. Right? I was looking at an article where one of the attorneys for the plaintiff said there'll be situations where a fighter would have 4 fights. And right before the 4th fight, they say, you need to sign this contract. Or, no, right after the 3rd fight, they say you need to sign this contract or your 4th fight is going to be not a revenue generating fight.
Wow.
Right? And who's going to stop them? They got a 90% market share. They have no union. So I think what probably happened is, did they get some contractual protections? Yes, right, the fighters. But mostly the UFC, which merged or bought out, I'm not sure, but they're together with WWE now, so it's one entity. They said, take this $335 million and go buy yourself something pretty. Because what power do they have? I don't know if you've ever, like I've been to a couple of UFC fights. You ever see the undercard? A UFC fight?
No, not me.
It's like 5'5", 110-pound dudes fighting. Right? Like what qualifies them? Like at least with the NBA, there's just a certain percentage of human beings that are that big and skilled. And the same with NFL. There's just a small percentage of people walking this earth that are that size, that fast, and that skilled. There are very skilled fighters in the UFC. I'm not here to shit on MMA fighters. But like the lower class of MMA fighters are just dudes, And let's be real. Like the whole attraction of the UFC is not just to fight. Part of the lure is just people just getting knocked the fuck out.
Right.
You know, not getting knocked out, getting knocked. I mean, there's like so many highlights of like people with like swollen heads and like meat hanging from their mouth as a result of getting hits.
Right.
They don't have any healthcare protections.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So it just is what it is. You know, like they are in a superior bargaining position, and the fighters, I don't know if they'll ever have the collective power to. One thing I can guarantee you that they did not get as a result of this lawsuit was a collective bargaining agreement. I can guarantee you that.
Definitely. And in reading about it, they have now a class action waiver in their contracts.
Class action waiver.
Yep.
Oh,
so they can't do this again.
Of course.
Yeah.
Man.
Of course.
Yep.
That's cold-blooded. So, I mean, so if you're representing one of these, workers, or what is it, UFC, one of these UFC fighters. I mean, so what is the argument that they're making? Like, they're being their skill is being, they're not able to really contract or, what is really the argument that's being made here? It's like they're not, because I know with boxing, for example, you get paid, you get what's in the purse, right? But then you also get sponsorship money, big time sponsors. So I think, first of all, the UFC fighters are not getting that, but they're also saying like their trade is being unfairly restricted. What does that mean? Like, do we know? Like, it's unfair. Like, why are they not being able to bargain and use their skill set the way that they want to?
I mean, I give you my thoughts. I mean, I look at it like this. If there were fast food restaurants and there was McDonald's was 90% of the market share and the other fast food restaurants were 10%, right? And McDonald's said, listen, you work here, most we're going to give you is $15 an hour, period. I don't care if you're the manager, whatever, right? And, if you go somewhere, we're going to have a covenant not to compete. You can't work in another fast food restaurant for another 5 years, right? What would we all say as lawyers? Like, oh, that's illegal for so many reasons, right? That's basically what's going on. Like, if you're out of the UFC, like, I know that there's other leagues, but like, nobody's watching that other stuff.
Right.
So they basically have supreme right. I'm positive they probably make their fighters sign 360 deals. That's not a fact, but why wouldn't they? And like, listen, we took this gamble on you, which is right? We didn't know that, you're just a firefighter or a tough guy at a bar. So we took this gamble on you. But so first we're going to sign you to a 10-fight deal, that we can terminate at will, but you can't get out of.
Right.
Right? Then if you do make it, then guess what? We want to do some profit sharing with you. We want to get a part of whatever you get. And you may sign that over in the beginning. Like what bargaining right do the fighters have?
Okay.
And the other thing is, like, I think about labor strikes and scabs. Like, we watched scab referees come on for the NFL for like 2 games, and people was like, I quit. Right? Like, we need real refs. NFL had a situation with replacement players. There will never be replacement players in the NBA, but there could be replacement fighters in the UFC.
Right.
Because it's just dudes fighting and getting knocked out. And not to mention, it's not just Americans. There's Brazilians, there's Chinese, it's a global sport. Right. So there's an infinite supply of men and women, that are willing to go in a ring, get knocked out, knock somebody out, get a couple dollars.
Right.
And I think they're going to have that problem for a long time because it's just it's just the nature of the sport and the way that it's set up.
So the lawsuit is looking for money, essentially.
Well, they were looking for a lot of other things.
Yeah.
They wanted injunctive relief. They were looking for a lot of things, but they only settled for the money.
Right.
To avoid the uncertainty of trial. What I did think was interesting was the fact that the amount was so low compared to what they could have gotten, right? Because they could have gotten treble damages at trial.
Right. That means like 3 times?
3 times. So it'll be interesting to see how the paperwork for the paperwork hasn't been filed, as far as I know, with regard to the settlement and the agreement and how they're breaking everything down. So it'll be interesting to see, how they're apportioning it for the fighters, how they're determining who gets what.
Right.
And who also is excluded from the class.
Right.
There's two different sets of lawsuits covering two different sets of people. I think one of the lawsuits, for both lawsuits, it's only for the fighters who are in the U.S. and for fights that were in the U.S. And then for the second lawsuit, which I believe covers a smaller class, you've got that issue of the class action waivers. So I'll be very interested to see, what comes out in their filing, because it'll all be detailed.
Okay. Yeah.
They'll have to file. Yeah.
That. Okay. Sounds good. Let's see here. Some discussions about this 4-hour work week. No, what is it? 4-day work week? 4 day. I wish it was 4-hour work week. 4-day work week. I mean, how did we even come up with a 5-day work week, right? Where did that come from? I wonder what the history is on that.
I think that was from the labor movement in the early turn of the century, I believe.
Really?
I think so. Oh, I need to go back for another history lesson here. But yes, we used to have a 7-day work week or a whatever. So right. Now we have a 5.
5 days.
And I think 4 is great. My office is trying to move towards 4. I'm trying to figure it out.
I'm trying to move towards 3. I guess if you work 7 days, you don't have no time to actually spend the money you're earning, right? So you got to give people some time to spend their money.
That's true.
Yeah.
I guess with the internet, we can work it out. But 4-day work week. I mean, what are your thoughts, Keith? I mean, how do you feel about it?
I tend to be, kind of pragmatic by nature. I think I think Bernie Sanders actually has a lot of good ideas, but a lot of times he just doesn't have the backing of the Democratic Party. And I think it's also an issue that because, first of all, like Republicans will probably, to a man or woman, vote against it. Because why? They're usually pro-business. And there's always going to be blue dogs, that, kind of are in lockstep with Republicans on this. But if you think about it and I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying this is my view, but I'm just saying from an employer standpoint, you have working at home and working virtually, which employees love, a lot of employers hate. I personally think it's cool. As long as, to me, you get your work done. I don't care if you do it from 9 to 5 or 5 to 9. Just get it done, right? And I don't want to have to micromanage you, but some employers are like totally against that. So now you got the pressure, and a lot of people left. A lot of employees said, listen, if I got to come back to the office, I'm out.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have that, and then on the heels of that, this, and the concerns that I think about are, from the employer standpoint, if I'm going to have you work less, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to pay you less.
Right.
Right? With inflation, like, how does that work? So like, it's a great idea. And listen, there's nothing stopping employers from doing it right now. If you want to have a 4-hour work week, then you can, but I think there's going to be issues with like federally mandating it. And I just think that, and especially now after the whole virtual working thing, I think, certain people will phrase it as an attack on the establishment of business as it exists. And there's going to be a lot of pushback on it. But like I said, I mean, as far as like individually as an employer, you can do it today.
With it. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's going to be the issue of what industries are exempt, right? Like the courts are not going to close for a day a week, are they?
Right.
We have a backlog of cases across the country. We can't possibly do 4 days a week. But the interesting thing, I think, also is the issue of productivity, right? People who have done this 4-day work week have shown that there's been an increase in productivity with the companies. And the other thing about productivity is that worker productivity has gone up over the past few decades, but worker wages have not.
Right.
And so I think this would be an interesting way to kind of recapture that for the worker, and looking at our priorities. What are we going to do with the efficiency that AI allows for? Are we going to give that 4-day work week? I mean, I think the worker should be able to recapture some of that. So I think it's a good idea. I'm just not sure how we would implement that practically.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to that. Yeah, a lot of new things coming out. We can talk about DEI. What is DEI?
Favorite.
What is DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It does not mean that we have unqualified female pilots. Miss Owens. Does not mean that. No.
What say you?
Diversity, we all went to law school, and law is a field that has for decades and is still struggling with diversity, equity, inclusion. And the way I think about it is, if your dad was a lawyer, right, and then you get to come in and you get to have an internship, and then you go to law school and your dad's like, hey, hire my son, right? And you have all of these generations of people who have access, who have the ability to do these things. And, now we're saying, okay, we need to pay attention to how are we giving access? Who's got access, right? Are we putting other people in positions of power that can bring other groups of people up?
True.
People who have been historically not been given those advantages. Right. We're not looking at unqualified candidates, and it's not something that looks for blame. I think there's been some talking points about who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor. That is not what DEI is about.
Right.
DEI is really about, like we were talking about earlier, making sure that all these perspectives, whether they're building an algorithm or whether they're building a business, making sure that people are included, making sure that they feel like they can express themselves and they feel safe in the workplace. And, transparency is another thing. Like, we have had historically wage gaps between men and women. Diversity, equity, inclusion, transparency is one of the principles. So we're making sure, are we paying people equitably?
Right.
It's those simple things. And I don't even know what the fake dragon that it's been painted out to be. Yeah. I don't know how we got to unqualified female pilots, but it has nothing to do with DEI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, it's a boogeyman. I think, first of all, to your point, it's natural for people to give jobs and opportunities to people that they know and that they're familiar with. If you came to me tomorrow and say, hey, my daughter's interested in your field of law, could she clerk? I'd be like, all right. So that's kind of a natural thing. But given the history of this country, that also means that, the better positions and the positions of access kind of stay within one class.
Right.
And that's actually anti-American if you think about it. Right? Because America's supposed to be building this ideal that you could go, literally from the outhouse to the penthouse.
Yep.
Right. And on merit. I don't think that anybody, that is a product of one of these systems, a DEI system or initiative, is less qualified, because that's a myth, right? Like, you still have to go through the same amount of training.
Yeah.
It just means that they extended the invitation to somebody else. It doesn't mean that, oh, you know what, because you got the invitation, going ahead to the finish line, right? It does not mean that. And I think part of that pushback is if you can reduce the credibility of it, then you undermine it,
right?
Because it does destroy the old way of doing business. It doesn't destroy it, first of all, right? It puts but it affects it. It affects the ability to just, because the downside of the system that I talked about is the downsides of nepotism, right? Yeah. Like, truth be told, I may give a position to your daughter. You may give a position to my son. My son might not give a shit. He might come to your office and fuck things up, But you're like, you know what? Keith's a friend of mine. I kind of got to keep him around, right? What about eliminating those inefficiencies? People don't think about that side of the argument. Right. There are plenty of incompetent pilots and all kinds of other positions, where somebody who's somebody's lackey or nephew or who's plugged in, right, is there. I'm more worried about the legacy people at Harvard than I am about, people that got in under DEI. Right.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're DEI is a boogeyman, but who's talking about these legacy admissions? Right. Like, that is some, we have, what's his name, Edward Blum, suing all over to prevent affirmative action and whatnot. Mr. Blum, why are you not suing for these legacy admissions? That's why is that okay? Isn't everything supposed to be on merit? But no, it's clearly not.
That's right. Yeah. They got the pulse. The media got the pulse wherever they want it to be, you know?
Right.
But DEI, man, it's about, creating pathways, accessibility. And I think there's generational gaps. Even the things I want to do for my kids, I can't quite do it. I mean, I'm just getting there. and I'm creating a path for them so they can create it for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
But even what I'm doing now, I think it's 2 or 3 generational deep before it really has its effects.
Yeah.
So I think we need to do something about this, man. And on that note, I'm glad we're here today. You guys came in, you know, ATL, New York. I know you LA now, but I always like to see where people
I don't
are from.
claim LA.
You don't claim LA?
No.
See, I knew it. I'm from Liberia, so, you know, I'm going home one of these days. But for now, just good rocking with you guys. Thank you guys for coming on, you know, sharing the wealth. And we got to do this again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, man, it's
Awesome.
been great. Thanks
Let's
for
do it.
having me as well, man.
All right,
Awesome.
cool. Peace.
All right.